Welcome to The Jewish Lens, a podcast to discuss anything and everything from a Jewish perspective. Now, please help me welcome the man who controls the media, your host, Jonathan Rosen.
Hello, and welcome to another edition of The Jewish Lens. I'm Jonathan Rosen, and today I am thrilled to welcome the author of several books, including Birthright Poems and Quiet Americans Stories. She teaches within the CUNY schools. She's on a couple of boards, including the Artists Against Antisemitism. She has a popular newsletter, The Practicing Writer, and most importantly, she's a fellow Brooklynite. Please help me welcome Erika Dreifus. Erika, thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
Well, we have a lot to cover, but I want to start by going back with you. So I want to talk about the Brooklyn stuff right off.
Sure.
So you grew up in Brooklyn, so which part?
So I grew up in Brooklyn until I was 9, and then we moved to New Jersey. So most of those 9 years were in Sheepshead Bay.
Oh, that's where I'm from. Yes, okay.
Really?
Yes.
So where did you go to elementary school?
I lived all over, but I went elementary school. I was in actually a yeshiva in Achiezer in Brooklyn. But then we went to Mexico, came back to New York, lived in Israel, came back to New York, and I went to Sheepshead Bay High School.
Okay, so I that's where I would have gone to high school. I would still been there, so we left. But my dad actually also grew up partially in Brooklyn in Sheepshead Bay and was in, I think, the first class to graduate from
really?
high school, because in fact they were still building it when he was in high school.
Wow.
And so he had to go to Lincoln for a year.
You know, Sheepshead's not a school anymore, you know, right? Well, it's something. It is a school, but not that school.
Okay.
Right.
To be something, and my mom had gone to Erasmus, which is a different sort of school than it was back in her day too. So a lot of changes in Brooklyn.
I don't remember if my mom went to Erasmus or not. I know that Erasmus was. I think Barbara Streisand was there.
Yep.
So,
well,
right.
Yes, she did go there.
Right.
It was a big school. A lot of people went there.
Yeah, I don't remember which. My mom lived in that area when she was a kid. I don't remember which school she went to. It might have been that. So, what was your family life like in particular with regard to Judaism? I mean, I'm just curious, like observant at all?
So we weren't very observant when I was living in Brooklyn. We actually became much more observant once we moved to New Jersey and found ourselves in a very non-Jewish neighborhood, and joined a synagogue where we all went instead of just me going to Hebrew school the last year we were in Brooklyn. But my grandparents, we lived very close to 3 of my 4 grandparents within the same set of buildings. We lived in you might know the Shore Terrace apartments.
Sure, maybe.
And anyway, so they all lived there, and we celebrated all the holidays. And my father's parents were both refugees from Nazi Germany.
Wow.
And my mother's mother was also an immigrant. She came right before, the 1924 laws kind of shut off immigration from Eastern Europe. So I was very aware of, that they were all, essentially refugees, really immigrants and refugees, and, why they had left their homes, and that was also part of our history as Jews too.
You mentioned the basically the quotas coming in from Europe, and that's how my family wound up in Mexico. That's why I have so many Mexican family now there too. So you moved. Just curious, like what prompted you to move out to Jersey? What made you leave Brooklyn to go to Jersey? Your family?
I think that, so my parents both being, children of immigrants sort of had the dream of, the house with the fence and all of that, and backyard and all the things that we weren't really going to have.
Getting in Brooklyn.
So clearly in Brooklyn. They did a lot of research into the public schools in New Jersey and picked a community that had a really good system. And so we went. That was basically our story.
I'm curious, so what age did you start showing an interest in writing, I guess? And even more so, when did you realize that you had a talent for it?
Well, it's interesting because in my elementary school, I was actually thinking about this, in my elementary school in Brooklyn, there was a school newsletter. And I think when I was in 2nd grade, they started publishing some of my little poems, which were
nice.
terrible poems. But that sort of gave me a bit of the itch to see him in print and so forth. And so I think it started then, and I really loved creative writing in school. And I, took any opportunity. I did the school newspaper. I was on the literary magazine and so on. And so I think I always had that itch. I mean, before that, of course, it was just that I loved reading.
Right.
And I especially loved reading about, other people who wanted to be writers. So, Jo March was a real heroine for me in Little Women. And then, Francie Nolan in A Tree Grows in Brooklyn. I really identified with a lot of these young women protagonists who wanted to be writers somehow. That sort of.
Those were your favorite books growing up?
I mean, Little Women was one of the first classics. I didn't identify so much with that book in terms of my life being very different from the March sisters. I did feel closer to Francie Nolan growing up again in Brooklyn, to the children of immigrants,
right.
And so on. So yes, that was a book I really, really loved growing up.
I'm curious. Do you remember what the first thing that you wrote was that you're talking about that you in school? Do you remember what the first? Because I remember what the first thing that I wrote was.
You mean that got published, or the first thing that I wrote?
When you were a kid, like really one of the, they may be published, but
those poems were the first things that were published. I do still have a number of my, my documents, so to speak. And I know that, first or second grade, I still have book reports about, and I really liked biographies a lot, or maybe I was being given biographies. And so I have, book reports after reading about Helen Keller and, Abraham Lincoln and things like that. And it's sort of, interesting to go back and see what sort of insights or lack thereof I had about what I was reading back then.
Well, you have such a fascinating bio. I was on your site. You've done a lot of many different things, first of all. So and one of the things that stuck.
I've been around a while too.
Yeah.
So.
Well, we all have. Well, you went to Harvard, and so before we even hit what you studied with Harvard, it's in the news so much now. So I just want to know, what were your experiences there? Did you find anti-Semitism at the time like it's like today, like prevalent like it is today?
Absolutely not.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I would say that back then there were still maybe some vestiges of the genteel anti-Semitism, mm-hmm. in terms of, a little bit of the Oliver Barrett the third sort of, bits just a little. I mean, I wouldn't say it was difficult in any sense that way, but I mean, it's a completely different story now.
Yeah, so
everyone's following it,
Right. Just curious, because since you went there, when you see what's going on today at the school that you went to, I mean, what goes through your mind when you see that?
It's very painful.
Mm-hmm. So I read that on your site that you found it tougher to take the swim test for crew than pass your studies. So what kind of things did you have to do for crew that you found it so difficult?
Well, the swim test was the first thing that was difficult for me, but I passed the swim test. And then we had to get up very early. Let's just, disabuse anybody who's listening to this at the idea that I had, I was on varsity crew or anything like that. This was, sort of like the intramural team that anybody could sign up for. And even there, I was, there were a lot of people. We went basically by dormitory, and there were a lot of people in my dormitory who wanted to do crew. And so I was in what's called the last boat. I mean, I was not. They weren't trying to get me, in the first boat to be representing the house, but getting up early and getting down to the boathouse and learning everything, like learning how to, take the boat out on the water and get into the boat. I didn't have a lot of experience with boats. So
were you in a lot of competitions? You did this?
No, and in fact, we had this big competition scheduled for, early May or something. It was spring semester, and we were rained out. So in fact, I don't think I ever competed.
Oh wow! Okay.
It was very low key crew. This was I have to emphasize how this was not varsity or junior varsity. It was like the level down from that.
So it's not the things that I see on TV with the.
I was definitely. There were people better than me who could do all of that. But yes. Yeah.
So you had been a modern European history major, and after college, when I'm moving to DC, working for the government. It's all fascinating to me. It seems like a logical progression anyway. So what were you doing for the government? Or is it one of those things that, if you tell me, I might wind up dead within a few hours? So just...
No, I think you should be okay.
Yeah.
It was very interesting. Again, I mean, to just go back in time. So this is the beginning of the 1990s, really. And so it was I guess it was George Bush, the father's administration. We're in that era. And I think that Congress had given more money to this agency, the Office of Government Ethics, which nobody had heard of at the time, but now people have heard of it, to hire recent college graduates. Basically, there was a program, you have a basic, GPA and a nice resume or whatever, and you can apply for the job. And I applied, and I received the job. And DC is really an exciting place, or back then anyway, it was an exciting place to be as a recent college graduate, and I really enjoyed it.
Well, I mean, just care that I don't care which party anyone votes for, but isn't government ethics like a contradiction?
Well, that's what everyone's been saying. They were telling me that 30 years ago.
Right.
So yes, I had, but really no. And I mean, in fact, what's one of the things that's interesting about that background is that when people talk about financial disclosure statements and things like that, I know exactly what they're talking about because, my job involved reviewing financial disclosure statements and interpreting them and all that.
So all the while that you're doing this, you had been studying writing and having pieces published. Now, what was the first thing that you had published as an adult that you were working on, that you got proud hey, I got this done?
Wow, that's such a good question because I wrote in a couple of different genres and I've sort of spent different time in different genres. So while I was in grad school in the 90s, again, I started writing book reviews and writing freelance for nonfiction, such as for encyclopedia articles and some, magazine articles and so on. And I also started taking creative writing classes in fiction. So through the 90s, I was doing that. And then I went into a low residency MFA program in creative writing, and I kept writing fiction. And I probably started publishing my short stories in literary journals around 2002 or so. So there's that as well. And I've also always been writing essays. I should have prepared better for this. I don't have my historical timeline in mind at this point.
So when did you first start thinking that? First, I want to hear what classes you took, also. But when did you first start thinking that, hey, I can do this? I'm pretty good at this. I want to do this seriously.
I always had a lot of positive feedback from professors and others that I could write. And, I think one thing to emphasize is that I was in academia for a long time.
Okay.
And a lot of my academic writing still somehow, I guess, what I was told was that I still had a voice. Academic prose is notoriously often quite deadly and jargon laden. Okay. And, perhaps one reason why I haven't done as well in academia is because I haven't mastered that type of writing. But at the same time, I remember I gave a talk. And one thing I was able to do often was, convert conference presentations into published pieces that, people might be interested in reading. And I remember from one of those pieces, I gave a talk at a conference, and someone came up to me at the end and said, after hearing the other people on the same panel, like, finally you started talking. And it was a real voice,
That's great, though. You were able to convey the same material in an easy to understand way that others weren't.
I try anyway. And I think that's part of it. You're not just writing for yourself, you're writing to be understood. And I think that's probably one thing that some academics don't.
And what classes were you taking at the time?
So I got my PhD in modern French history with sort of sub areas in the history of modern international relations and French literature. And so I was taking a lot of those sorts of classes. And then you do a lot of sort of independent study. You get very long reading lists and so on. And I was doing a lot of reading at that time. So,
you got an agent, I read, like in 2001, right? So what was your path there? How long did that take to get the agent?
It didn't take me that long to get that first agent because I was very lucky. Actually, one of my academic colleagues heard me give a presentation again about a novel I was writing, actually about my first and at this point my only novel manuscript, and he offered to introduce me to his agent or refer me to his agent, and that is really a great way to get an agent, to be referred by one of their clients, and she took me on and wanted me to do still a lot more work on the novel, which I did. And it eventually, we went out on submission with the novel and got a number of interesting responses and even a request to revise and resubmit or two. But the novel never sold, which I'm fine with now. I realize it's probably better that way.
There are so many authors who say, and I'm in the same boat, by the way. My first novel did not sell that, and so many authors say it's later on, like the second, third, fourth book are the ones that wound up selling. What was that first book about?
Well, it was the proverbial Holocaust novel, also grounded in a mix of my own family history and some of the research I had done while I was working on my dissertation, because basically I ran across some materials when I was doing some preliminary research that just really, hit me in the heart as echoing some of my own family experience, and I kind of melded those. And it was one of these novels with, a past storyline and a present day storyline where, the grandchild is researching the family history and so on. And a lot of those stories have become very familiar over time. I would say that, in 2001, they weren't as omnipresent. But yeah, so that was, but I mean, you learn so much in the process of writing a novel. And it really it made a huge difference in my writing.
I think it was my third novel that finally sold, and it was on my second agent. That the first one that sold.
Yeah, so, I mean, that agent and I parted ways. So, yeah,
it's a very familiar tale. So after getting how long did it take after you finally got an agent to get your first book published?
Well, I didn't get another agent. I did try to get other agents because then my next book was actually the collection of short stories.
Quiet Americans?
Right. And that was difficult. I had some wonderful responses from agents again, including some who really gave me tremendous advice on, which stories they thought were strongest and sequencing the book and so on, but who ultimately felt that they couldn't sell the collection without a novel. And since my novel had sort of been everywhere already, they said that wasn't going to work very well, and I didn't have another novel. So at that point, I had been sending both the novel and then I started sending the short story collection to presses that would consider unagented materials, as well as contests for unagented manuscripts. And I didn't really succeed there either, but the way the book got published, and the direct answer to your question is it took another 10 years. If you say from 2001 with the novel, 2011 is when my story collection was out, because somebody who was starting a small press happened to learn about me and my stories and was interested in the manuscript and then published it.
Well, that's for those who don't know, can you tell a little bit what Quiet Americans is about?
So Quiet Americans is a collection of 7 short stories, largely grounded in histories or snippets of experience of my paternal grandparents. And starting, back in the pre-war era, going roughly chronologically through time to post-war and even into the 21st century. So there are some overlapping characters, but not all of the stories are linked by character, but they are all sort of linked in the sense of dealing with Jewish experience, either of the German Jews who are you meet early in the novel, or their descendants.
I love all that things. I mean, very fascinating, all of this. So was I reading this right? You started your own publishing company at some point?
No, I did not start my own publishing company. But
so I misread
I worked for a startup publishing company. It wasn't mine. I did that for about 3 years.
Got it. Okay. So I misread that. So, and you're still teaching now, right?
Yes, yes.
So where are you teaching and what are you teaching now?
So I'm not teaching French history. I am teaching. I actually teach Jewish studies. I teach Jewish literature through the Jewish Studies program at Baruch College
Right.
of the City
So you are
University.
still at Baruch.
Yep.
Okay. And I'm sorry, because you in Jewish studies, you said?
Right. So Jewish studies courses tend to be cross-listed in other departments. And so I'm usually listed in English or comparative literature or something like that because it's always a literary course. So I'm building a new course right now on Jewish life writing, which is quite the challenge for me. But I'm looking forward to teaching that in the fall.
How's the environment in Baruch? Because I know I used to go to Brooklyn College a little bit, and when I see what's going on in Brooklyn now, I'm just stunned.
Well, I'm an adjunct and I'm not there every day. So others may be having other experiences. And certainly there are things going on throughout the system. And even, in terms of the union, for instance, I've resigned from the union. But on campus, my students have been wonderful and I haven't had any unpleasant experiences on campus.
Good. So I want to go back. Your website, I looked at your website is fantastic. Besides the information about yourself, you have blogs and newsletters, all very informative. Many people subscribe to it, I see. So first of all, can you tell us about the blog and the newsletters? And also, I guess, how long did it really take to start gaining traction? Because, it's really fantastic. Just where you could see the numbers grow.
So we'll go back again. I just have to remind everyone again that I've been around for a while. So after I got my MFA, I actually had this idea that I was hoping to get a tenure track job teaching creative writing. I wanted to be, in academia still, but I wanted to be teaching creative writing. And I didn't understand at the time the big difference between teaching creative writing and teaching, let's say, history, which is that to get a tenure track job teaching history, it's fine if you haven't published your dissertation or your thesis yet, because they expect you to take several years, polishing up your manuscript and getting it ready for publication and getting it published. And that will help you go up the ladder, up the tenure ladder. Whereas for creative writing, the MFA degree isn't enough. They expect you to have finished and published at least one book these days. If you look at and back then too, if you look at the job announcements. So I was applying for all these jobs that I had no hope of getting. And in the meantime, I was still doing sort of, contract teaching and adjunct teaching and freelance writing and so on. And I had all of this information. As I was learning about the creative writing world, I was amassing all of these resources that I wanted to share with other people. And I started to use some of the online tools that were beginning to be known, such as an online newsletter or a blog, to share that information. And by the way, at the same time in the newsletter, advertise the courses that I was teaching that people from the public could sign up for and so on. And that is how it started. And I think, my very first newsletter went out to something like 9 subscribers. But that was, 21 years ago. So the fact that I do have over 12,000 subscribers now, it sounds very impressive and it's wonderful and I value every subscriber, but it didn't happen overnight, obviously. So that's how all of that began.
Well, whoever doesn't subscribe, I recommend that you do, because it really is a fantastic newsletter. And you also have a lot of resources for Jewish writers specifically. So what prompted you to start that?
I can't remember when that started exactly, but it just became increasingly clear to me that, again, a lot of these things that I was looking for that didn't seem to exist, or whenever I would, I became friends with a lot of Jewish writers, and there were just conversations we were having that led me to realize that, people want this information. And I get lots of appreciation messages of appreciation from people for the resources that are there. And I get plenty of them, for the general resources, but I really do get a lot of a lot of really wonderful validation from other Jewish writers who are grateful to have the resources.
That's really great. That's very rewarding. I saw on your site a lot of the comments made from others. That's fantastic. So you're also on the board for the Artists Against Anti-Semitism. I've had Zebby Owens on. I've had Debbie Reed Fisher on. So we're also part of this. Can you tell me about the organization itself and how it all came together and your involvement?
So I was not one of the founding members. I think you've had some of the people you've mentioned, I think, are some of the founding members. And how they got started with this pretty much immediately after October 7th. I think there were some group chats among some writers who knew each other,
Right.
just to try to figure out something to do. And the first thing that they did was they planned an auction to raise funds to support training the Project Shema organization to conduct more training and help with awareness and try to diffuse some of the situations that we were seeing begin to crop up. And how I got involved was that I saw news about that auction, and I think I donated copies of my books or something like that. And then I just kept following what the organization was doing, and when they issued a call for applications for board members, because the people who were leading it, Allison Hammer in particular, really was doing the lead on this, but Allison and Jill Santopolo were asking for a board now that they had founded the organization as an official 501c3 nonprofit. Okay. So that, I would say probably about 6 months or so, don't quote me exactly, but from the project getting off the ground right after October 7th to getting the nonprofit established and calling for, applications for the board. And then I joined the board as secretary, and I've been involved ever since then.
Really great group and organization. It's very worthwhile. So you're also on the board for another one, the Leo Baeck?
The Leo Baeck Institute.
Baeck? Okay.
And the Leo Baeck Institute is older. In fact, the Leo Baeck Institute is celebrating its 70th anniversary this year. And it's an archive and cultural center for the history of German-speaking Jewry. So not just German Jews, but Jews from Austria or Czechoslovakia and so on. And it's a really wonderful and important center, and I'm very proud to be involved with it.
Do you speak German?
Not really. I had for my history graduate school, I had to pass a semblance of a German reading test, and I didn't do as well on it as I did on the French test, but they said that was fine because I was doing French history anyway. So no, I do not really speak German.
Well, you are very involved in a lot of other Jewish causes, I see. So when you look at the state of publishing now, what do you see with regard to Jewish writers? I mean, how is the industry treating them? This is all your opinion. This is all subjective. So what do you feel?
What I have been saying, over the last 20 months or so, is that, what we're seeing now is not new. It's just far more visible and pervasive and vitriolic. I was starting to see this 20 years ago. I date it from the Second Lebanon War, really, in terms of the sort of shockingly misguided, let's put it that way, misguided views of people high up in the literary community, literary influencers, other writers, leaders of organizations who really just were making it very uncomfortable to be one's full Jewish self, if that full Jewish self included, as it does for about 80% of us, I think we know, a sense of connection with Israel.
I think the number's even higher, actually.
Yeah.
But yes,
minimum. Yeah.
It's no, I couldn't agree with you more. I've been seeing this. I've said this on here before too. I think when I first even I've had an agent tell me to make a story of mine less Jewish, and even when I was a literary agent, I've had agents turn something down, and say, "Oh, we've already acquired a Jewish book for this quarter," and it not doesn't matter what genre or anything. It was a Jewish book. Those were the words used. So yeah, it was absolutely incredible. So what are the next thing that you're working on?
At the moment, I feel as though I'm just working on writing, I'm sort of ghost writing a lot of things, not technically for other writers, but in terms of a lot of the advocacy that I'm doing. So that is something that I'm doing. I'm always getting my next newsletter ready. I had been working on trying to break into children's writing, and I still have a manuscript that's sitting around, kicking around there that I may return to. But I'm really focused this summer on getting this life writing course underway. So I don't have any of my own writing projects as yet fully advanced enough to speak about. So people will have to follow me on social media and wait for updates.
Well, the work that you're doing is great. So anyway, besides anything, I really applaud you and admire you for a lot of the work that you're doing there too. And speaking of social media, how can people follow you on social media?
Well, you mentioned my website, and that is erikadreifus.com. And you can see hopefully how to spell my name from show notes. And
well, it'll be in the title of this one too. So
okay, great. And all of my accounts are linked there over on the website. So hopefully it's easy to find.
Well, Erika, I want to thank you again for taking the time to come on. It's been a pleasure. Like I said, I admire the work that you're doing and respect it totally. And I appreciate everything that you've done so far.
Thank you. And likewise.
Okay, well, this has been The Jewish Lens. I'm Jonathan Rosen. Again, a very special thanks to Erika Dreifus. And please like, comment, and subscribe.
Thanks for tuning in to The Jewish Lens, where all items used was strictly kosher.